Hey, everybody. Welcome to another interview with Glenn Guzzo. Do I get that right? Did I finally get it right?
Put the emphasis on the first syllable, and then you're good.
Okay. Guzzo. Glenn Guzzo. I know I've been working, I botched it every time. Even this one's a botch, but happy to be joined by you, Glenn. I have Jay Villing here also. We're going to be talking to Glenn about the newest version of Stratomatic football, Stratomatic 2022, and which is based on the 2021 statistics, the 2021 card set. So really excited to get into some of this stuff. It's funny because I didn't know. I thought I was gonna have to introduce Jay to Glenn, like in person, but apparently you've met Glenn before. Jay, tell us that story.
Yeah, actually, back sometime in the early 90s, Glenn was living up in Akron. He was a reporter with the Akron Beacon Journal, right, Glenn?
I was managing editor.
Okay, yep, managing editor. And he threw a convention, was the first Strat tournament I ever played in. Hal showed up and he introduced the very first AI. It was a floppy disk that were for solo play, and it was introduced there. And I got to meet Glenn, and I've played in as many Strat tournaments as I can ever since. Always go to the Mad Dog, Brammer, Orion, Ron tournament in Bloomington as much as I can. And Glenn's an awesome guy, and I want to say, Glenn, this means so much to the Strat community for you to come and just share, some of your wisdom. For Strat to allow you to do it. We appreciate it. I appreciate it. It's awesome. So
it's good to be back.
You.
It's good to be back. You guys are great.
Yeah, it's cool because there's not. I mean, if you think about it, if you're playing a game, something that you really enjoy, how often are you able to talk to the people who, build it and make it and have a part in it? So that I totally agree with Jay. It's a great opportunity for the Strat community to interact with Stratomatic on a more intimate basis and a neat basis. It's kind of cool. And when we're not looking to influence you to give our players the best ratings that there is, but
yes, you are.
Maybe no. I'm in so many leagues, Glenn, that no matter what you do, you're boosting some of my players and you're putting some of my players on.
One constant. It's not like. It's like baseball and Field of Dreams. The one constant in Dennis's teams, Russell Wilson. The one constant.
Yeah, I usually give up the farm to get him, no matter what. So, but we're not here to talk about Russ today. I don't really have any complaints on his card, and I think it really, for the first time, I think it's like exactly carded the way he played and the way the team played. I was really happy with the way the Seahawks came out. They're going to struggle at times. That's just the way it is. That was a 9-7 team, but or 7-10 team. Excuse me, it should have been 9-7. So, but anyway, I thought they were well done. If Russ wouldn't have got hurt, they would have been a borderline playoff team, and that's kind of where they are. But speaking of quarterbacks, one of the quarterbacks that I think people have talked about in the forum at being undercarded was the Buffalo Bills quarterback. Josh Allen. So do you have any insight, Glenn, on how his card kind of got dinged a little bit this year?
Well, I think the big thing is he has 9 must runs on his card. And so that's going to take away from completions. Of course, running is a big part of Allen's game. So you got to. I will tell you this, we'll talk about quarterbacks and all their various forms. It's really the cards are formula. There's not a lot of discretion going into those at all. I think I mentioned last year, there's one item of discretion that I have for putting in, and that has to do with long pass ability, but it's only one item in determining the long pass stuff. And I have no discretion on any of the rest of it. So
when the card comes out like this, it's basically based on statistics and the Stratomatic formula.
Yeah, the statistics aren't just the statistics you know about. I mean,
right.
Unless you have access to large variety of stats that aren't just generally available. So lots of stuff go into it. First downs, passes of certain lengths. It's quite a few columns that, when we were back before we computerized a lot of this in the spreadsheet days, I mean, for the quarterback completions, it's probably 200 columns. It's just a lot of data that's in there. So it's not easy to just say, well, here's the formula, even if I
Right.
get at liberty to do that.
Okay, now has there ever been a time when the formula fed in and you're like, well, that just doesn't look right, and there was a mistake in one of the data stuff coming in there? Or is it that, you say, let's 100% certainty that's exactly what we wanted to do with that card?
No, that card is what it has to be. Anytime you're dealing with spreadsheets and so forth, there's a possibility of some extraneous data, or bad data. But if that was true, it would show up for a lot more than one player. For instance, we had a problem with the data last year on running. Maybe it was 2 years ago on running backs, and I said, wait a minute, this can't be right. And I had someone go into the computer programming part of it, and we found an error. But I've been doing this long enough now, since about 2007, that if there's a serious problem in the data, it's very unlikely to get past me. The mistakes that might appear in the game tend to be an inputting problem rather than the data being bad.
Right, and I think that we've seen that before, maybe on past seasons, where you're doing a lot of data, manual input of something that's already carded, and I could see where that would run into a problem.
Yeah, and there are actually a tremendous number of rules that Hal created for even the placement of results on cards, and so you got to keep your concentration up, when you're doing that. And so it is entirely possible, that, well, wait a minute, we had a problem with Mixon's card 2 or 3 years ago, and that had to be redone because that was my mistake. It was something I had overlooked, and we had to redo that card. So there are enough players rated in enough ways with enough entries on their card that perfection has never been possible. And it's a particular issue when I'm doing the flat pass reception columns, because of the various rules about who gets yardage and how much of it and how that yardage might be modified. And so every time I'm done with that, it totally gets checked, fly-specced by somebody else, the company, Len Schwartz, and then he and I go over that stuff. But at my best, there might be 20 entries that are wrong. That start off wrong, but you're talking about 32 teams times every receiver who has a flat pass. So basically everybody but the quarterbacks, 11 guys per team, 400 and times 32.
Right.
Talking 352 guys. 20 of them have a mistake. The mistake might be he needs 2 more yards at his right. No.
Right.
Okay, so we're not talking about revamping the whole card, But,
Sure. And there's been like threads on the forum where you have guys that are very good at nitpicking the fine details of it, like Kurt Klein, Heavy Jumbo. They'll come up with these things. They're like, wow, what are you looking at the third tight end on the 1966 backers for, that kind of stuff.
Well, I think that's great. I'm the weird guy, and everywhere I travel with friends who knows who the backup offensive linemen are.
Exactly.
Most people can't even name all the starters on their own team's offensive line.
Yep. For sure. Us draft leaguers know what that's like. So,
So speaking of perfection, right? How can you give us any insight into what we've never seen before? This Aaron Rodgers short pass wrong card. First of all, awesome. We love to see new stuff. We have never seen that before. Any insights into that? That's amazing.
Well, he just had this phenomenal season, and in fact, under our normal rules, he would not have gotten his interception on 12, but he had so many completions, it was the only place it could go. So he would have had his interception on 11, but he got it on 12 because of all the completions. And it's just, obviously it was very eye-popping. It was certainly eye-popping when I was looking at the numbers. But Rodgers, I can't tell you anything more than, he had the kind of year that stood out in every way. I mean, no matter, he had problems with his offensive line. He had all kinds of different changes at wide receiver, as receivers, and even running backs. And there's just no way to stop this guy, no matter what you do to his offense.
Yeah, it's one of those cards where you not only do you want to guess them right, but you want to double team correctly with the free safety. Otherwise, you're in a heap of trouble. So.
Well, and I don't know how often you guys have watched the Packers, but it's really tough to keep that guy down, and he's especially worrisome if your team is ahead by less than 7 when he's got the ball in the last possession.
Nice. Well, going one way to land on that guessed wrong card is to have a very strong running back, and I think Jay had somebody he wanted to asked about that. If you're in a draft league and you got that quarterback card with this particular running back card, you might be in for a lot of fun.
Yeah, so James Conner popped out at me.
Yeah, sure does.
Yeah, so and even here, we know that you card based upon the team and based upon who they play, and we get that. Here you have James Conner averaging 3.7 a pop, and Chase Edmonds at 4.5 a pop. Chase Edmonds has a nice enough card, but James Conner is pretty much better in everything, receiving everything, than Chase Edmonds. Edmonds can get around the end a little bit better, but Edmonds says, that's a wild card for 3.7. Any thoughts or insights you're at liberty to give?
Yeah, I can give you several. One, Connor's 15 touchdown runs is influential here. His yards per carry were diminished by his number of his short touchdown runs. All right. So as a consequence, he came up in our formulas as one of the very, very few backs who's entitled to what we call tough yards. It's just a part of a formula. But it improves his card right for sure. And when you improve a card's right column, it improves his overall value in the Stratomatic formulas. In fact, it is important for the starter to be better than the backup in Stratomatic scheme of things, and we see that at the offensive line, we see it at the defense, we see it everywhere. All right, so Edmonds had the higher average, which is going to mean one of two things. Either he is going to have his value changed, usually by decreasing his right gains, or Connor is going to be improved, or a little bit of both. And so that is very much a vivid example of the team concept. And if you consider Arizona, I mean, those are two complementary backs. They were intended to be complementary backs. It's important that they play as complementary backs. And I think this is the closest that we could do for that. 15 touchdowns is something that doesn't happen a heck of a lot often in the NFL these days. And
so it's similar to what you guys did a few years ago, or maybe a decade ago now, with the kneel downs, where on the quarterback's must run averages, or the running averages, you remove the kneel down so that it could be a true reflection of what happened when they actually tried to run the ball.
Yes, and it's been far less than a decade. I would say it's probably been no more than 4 or 5 years.
Got it. Well, time flies when you're having fun. So
yeah, as you get older, it's harder to measure it.
Gotcha. All right. One of the new things that was added this year, one of the new features, was the quick subs feature. So I'm going to share my screen here real quick. So for those of you who are not familiar with it, that are watching this, it's a really neat way to be able to, in order to get it to come up, just click on the screen. And then let's just say you wanted to, well, I guess before you do that, you need to make your substitution. So let's just say it's late in the game and you want to put the backup quarterback in with all the backup running backs. You could just make those substitutions, and then you click on the screen and you say, I want to save this one. And we're going to say late all backups. And then now you have that formation in. So you run your play. And then the next time what the generic CM would bring up is, the starters are back in there. Now, instead of having to substitute each one out again, you can just, that's by formation too. So you have to click the same formation. Then you can click in the quick subs, load that in, and now all those guys are in the game again. So it's a great time saver. How involved were you in adding that new feature? And Nobis had a question: is there a way that we can use it so that we can run multiple plays without re-clicking on it through each play? So I guess what he's looking for is, like, I want to come in here and set it up for, all of the different substitutions. Is that something that you guys could do maybe in the future, so that instead of having to, okay, now I did it for my blocking back set, now I've got to do it for my one back, 2 tight end sets. It would be nice to be able to come in and set them all up and then be done with it.
First of all, I had nothing to do with it. And because it's the province of Strat computer programming, Bob Winberry's the guy to answer that question. I did reach out to him in anticipation of your question. He said that, here's his answer. He said a fully automated system would have required a rewrite of the computer manager subsystem to do it in a fashion other than single play macro format. So he says a complete rewrite is not even a possibility at this point. All right. So when I hear language like that from Bob, translation is he is more than busy with other projects. That one's just too big, because to devote his time to something that big means not doing a whole lot else. So I would say that's desirable. It's one of those things, very long list of things that are desirable, but none of us should count on it happening soon.
Makes sense. And it is a clever solution because you're able to do a lot by having that macro style overlay on there. And in the end, it will be a big time saver for solo replayers, for draft leaguers. It's just going to take a little bit of time getting used to it.
Yep.
But, we'll look for feedback on the forum on maybe ways to tweak it a little bit to be even more effective. All right. Back to the boundary cornerback again. Every year we seem to talk about this. Jay, did you want to talk a little bit about your question on the slot/boundary quarterback dilemma?
Yeah, first of all, it's cool. I'm going to use the Bengals. As you can see, I'm in Cincinnati. I'm a Bengals fan, and the way it's currently set up fits the Bengals perfectly, absolutely perfectly. Right? You got Awuzie at one cornerback, and he's rock solid. He's a 5. You've got Eli Apple at the other cornerback. A lot of hate for Eli Apple around here, but he's a 4. That's fine. And they've got a really good slot corner in Mike Hilton. Mike Hilton's a 5. He plays the slot. He's the epitome of a slot, and he's a good slot corner. He's a 5. Perfect. But now you get some teams that have some mix and match corners, right? Some teams that have 3 legitimate boundary corners. I'm thinking of the Green Bay Packers heading into this season, right? They've got Rasul Douglas, who came from out of nowhere. They have a tremendous year last year. Good corner. Obviously, Jair Alexander coming back from injury. And they've got this young stud, Stokes, coming in. All 3 are going to be mixing, and so that's where I like the idea of the old way of doing it, where you can rate a cornerback, but just, like a boundary. Casey Hayward got that rating his rookie year. He's a 5 corner. Bradley Roby had it a couple times. He's a 5 corner. Not a slot kind of guy, a legitimate 5 boundary corner. So while it's cool and it works for some teams, I could see where it might hamstring us with some other teams. Jalen Ramsey is even playing in a slot some now. So it's not necessarily they're taking their dogs and putting them in a slot. Sometimes they want a better cover guy in the slot. I don't know. What any thoughts? And I thought too, the reason why we can't do the old corner might just be a programming dilemma, right? How do you rate that guy along with years past? And, I can see logistically that could be what holds us back. I don't know, Glenn, what do you think?
Several things. Programming is sometimes an issue. Doing something very different has to work in the computer game before it can be allowed into the board game. All right, there are some things that I wish the computer game would do because board gamers would automatically do them. But since the computer's not doing it, they're not made rules in the board game either. But that's just one part of this. I mean, let's talk about the Packers. Joe Alexander's not even rated, right? He played 4 games or something.
Right. Now, 2021 and behind, looking ahead, right?
Okay. Well, looking ahead, we really have to deal with that when it happens. I mean, Rasul Douglas, as you said, came out of nowhere. If he's a 6 again next year or 5 even, I think probably a lot of people will be surprised, but maybe not. Are they going to have 3 healthy boundary cornerbacks who all deserve ratings? Not very many. Not very many would deserve 3 5s. And then we have the issue of who's playing corner, who's playing slot. One of the issues facing any game is how playable are you going to make this game? How detailed are you going to make it at the expense of being able to play it in a reasonable time, and with less complexity so that more people can, in fact, play it or willing to play it. In the NFL now, there's hardly a player who plays one position. The only guys who do that are quarterbacks and offensive linemen. In fact, I made a comment in a Strat conference call while we're doing the football rating, because I have data on the percentage of time each defender played at each position each game. And I said, so take a guess, guys. How many defenders in the NFL played a single position all game long? For one game, any game of the year.
Maybe like Vita Vea at nose tackle all the time. That's about it.
He's
0.
line up and blocking back.
0.
Oh, that's
Okay.
true.
0 defenders in the NFL played one position all game long, any game of the year you want to choose. All right, so theoretically we could rate everybody everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them get 0s because they didn't play there very much or they didn't play it very well. But, now the rating system just goes bonkers.
Mm-hmm.
Because you got to have backups. The backups have to be worse than the starters. It's hard enough now in many situations, such as the defensive back, since the nickel is the much more common formation.
Mhm.
All right, it's a big problem on the defensive line because here's a backup who didn't play very well behind a starter who didn't play very well, but the backup's got a half a sack and the starter got none.
Mhm.
And now I got to give the starter a 4 who didn't deserve it.
Mhm. Mhm.
All right, so those things are part of the mix. It's difficult. But then the other thing we have to remember now about boundary guys and slot guys, it's not something everybody wants to hear because everybody wants the maximum flexibility for their team to be able to use their guys wherever. But generally speaking, defensive backs who play slot play there because they are deemed by their coaches not be able to guard the really wide out receivers who tend to be bigger, more physical, jump ball guys.
Mhm.
Slot defensive backs often are smaller. They have to be quick, a quick twitch kind of thing. They may be such good defensive backs that when they play boundary, they're playing well, but for the most part, they're not. They're playing slot because they're not good boundary cornerbacks. Now we got a guy who's a great illustration of this year, and Marlon Humphrey.
Hmm.
Marlon Humphrey has been rated as a starter in Strat because he starts 16 games, not this year, okay, previous years. And he's been a 6 even though what he's really playing most of the time is slot.
Mhm.
All right. This year, Marlon Humphrey was a boundary cornerback. And he gave up more receiving touchdowns he's ever given up in his life. The Baltimore Sun reported even after he was out for the year, after he went out, I think, in week 13 or 12, he didn't play the last 4 games of the season, that he hadn't even been playing well before he was hurt.
Mhm.
And there were several comments early in the season that he played very badly in weeks 1 and 2, so forth. He didn't have a good season. He had a poor season.
Agreed.
He's like a 4 this year.
Mhm.
All right. He's playing boundary now, and it shows. All right. And this would be the case if you had these slot guys playing boundary most of the time. Another thing you can almost bank is that if a guy switches from cornerback to safety, it's because he failed at cornerback.
Mhm.
Right.
So
Let me get a quick question here. So I hear what you're saying. So if Marlon Humphrey, which he played a lot of slot, he's rated a 4 as a boundary cornerback, he would be a perfect case to have a dual rating because right now he's a right cornerback 4, but if you would move him to the slot, he'd be a 0, and that's where he really is better. So, in cases like this where you're rating him as the starter on the outside, is it possible in the game to give him a boundary 4, right cornerback 4 slash cornerback 4, so that he's a 4 in the slot and a 4 on the outside? Is that possible in the game? That's really what the question is.
no, it's not. It's not something we can program now, according to Bob Lindbergh. But
So we have to live with.
I understand your question has a lot to do
Right.
more with Marlon Humphrey.
Right.
But
No,
he wasn't playing
like,
slot this year, so he would have gotten a 0 if we could split it.
sure, but if we go back to say Casey Hayward's rookie year with the Packers, where they had 3-5 cornerbacks across the board, how would you card that now, where you had a slot? You would just make Hayward the slot 5 and 2 outside guys the starters at 5, and Hayward would be a 0 if he's on the outside.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. I mean, like we've beaten this horse over and over again. I think, it's one of those things where be careful what you wish for because you just might get it. We wanted this change, and now we're going to have to live with this change because, we've bootstrapped this onto the game, and we can't go back to the old way of doing it.
Well, there are
Maybe we don't want
to me. There are plenty of benefits.
Sure.
Really, in the old way, the only way Hayward, to use that example, would have gotten a 5 as a sub is if both other outside cornerbacks were 5s or 6s.
Right.
In most cases, that third guy would have been rated lower than what he is now because the starters didn't support it.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense.
we get that, there's trade-offs, right? I teach economics, a quote that I use all the time. In life, economics as in life, there are no solutions, only trade-offs. And so, you get trade-offs with everything, it's a great.
Well, the NFL is the ultimate trade-off game. I mean, one unit doesn't do its job, it affects the whole team.
Yeah.
And you get an offensive line that gives up fast pressure up the middle, it's going to destroy the entire offense. I don't care who's your quarterback is.
Mm-hmm.
A defense.
Joe Burrow will attest to that.
Yeah, a defense that can't get takeaways is going to kill the offense because they're going to have to go 80 yards every time after punts. So football is really the ultimate team game, and so every team that we rate in Stratomatic, for me, looks like a jigsaw puzzle. Is this team going to be able to play the way their players were used? Are they going to be able to look like the team that they really were? And then, after all that's done, take a look and say, well, is this team going to win as many games as it did? And if it's not, are there really good reasons? Like, well, they lost a bunch of close games due to special teams. I do look at that. In fact, every blowout game I'm recording through the year, and I'm also writing notes on why it was a blowout, if it wasn't just one team just mauling the other, offense versus defense. If it had to do with special teams, then I flag that at the end of the season, say, well, this team won 3 games with special teams, lost 1 game because of special teams. That accounts for 2 wins. And if their overall performance, the way we rate them, says they are underperforming by a couple wins, and say, they'll get it back in special teams, or they can get it back in special teams.
Makes sense. Speaking of special teams,
yeah,
let me pull this up here, because for the first time ever, we've seen on the coverage of the coverage unit of the Denver Broncos this year, there is a touchdown on the kickoff return, auto touchdown, not a long gain.
Yeah, wild, huh?
Yeah. plus 50, plus 53 are pretty bad. You get that touchdown at the bottom. So talk a little bit about what went into carding that unit.
Well, I don't do the special teams, but that was something I flagged. I said, wait a minute, look at these numbers here. Is this right? And I said, well, yeah, actually, they were unbelievably bad. And in fact, after I flagged it, they said, we actually need to make the 12 a touchdown. Wow. I didn't ask for the touchdown. I figured that's not something we ever do. Mm-hmm. These numbers were just so crazy. I said, well, it'll look better if we actually make 12 a touchdown. Mm. So, okay, let's get Denver out there and play games.
Yeah, and we're now to go along with that, we're also seeing there was a change made on the touchbacks. So now they're when you're playing with Denver, you have that big block of touchbacks from 5 to 9.
Yeah,
you're not going to be able to return those as much. Whereas before, a lot of those would be the -8, -9. They've been pushed to the outside of the card, so that obviously had something to do with it as well.
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, anytime you're dealing with math and you have a small sample size, then the numbers get more volatile, right? They get more extreme, one way or the other. So in this case, there's going to be so few kickoffs returned, the yards they gave up are really going to get packed in there. Mm-hmm. So that's it.
I didn't even realize how high those touchbacks were. Glad you pointed that out. I just assumed it was all the -8 into the end zone, -9 into the end zone, as opposed to just flat out putting that touchback. That was a great touch. It was a great call by Strat and Glenn, who you guys did great with that.
That wasn't my credit. I just flagged that one thing on the return. I said this because it was so extreme. I just asked if it's right.
They only had 14 returns, 2 of which were touchbacks. So with all the, excuse me, 2 of which were touchdowns, correct. And so so that'll help replicate that with all those touchbacks. Well done. Well done.
Yeah, so I mean, going along with that, now obviously in baseball, as a Stratomatic coach or whatever, you can create cards, you can edit cards. We don't have that ability in football. And I had that question on there for Gordy on the forum asked, will we ever have that? Now I understand, as a commissioner of many online leagues, I understand the nightmare that it would cause if you had one guy have this value on the card over here and somebody else had on their side of the screen, they had a different value. That could just wreak havoc in online leagues. How does it work in baseball when you make these cards? Are you able to play online with them? And will we ever see the ability for standalone players to edit their own cards?
All right, 2 questions there. First is it's really up to the commissioner of the league to make sure everybody in the league has got the same version of the game and same update before net play commences.
In baseball?
Yes.
Got
yes. It. Well, really in any league, but
right.
But baseball is what applies here because it's the only game where you can edit player cards. The second part of that question is no, you will never, in the lifetime of Bob Winberry and Hal Richmond, you will never see the ability to edit player cards in any other game because of what happened after they put it into the baseball game. And that was, they ended up in a legal situation with a guy decades ago who created an entire set of cards and then for a different season and then started marketing it. And Stratomatic said, no, you're not doing that. And it ended up with a lawsuit and it ended up pretty messy. They were able to put a stop to it. That was enough to convince Strat that there had been a mistake in the first place to even allow it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
One of the questions I think I skipped over, but I wanted to go back to, what about you, Glenn, for you personally? Do you have a favorite season that you play? Are you in any? Are you in any leagues? I would guess you probably wouldn't have time, but what for your solo replay projects? What are some of the favorite seasons you like to play?
Okay, well, going to get a couple questions there. First of all, I won't allow myself to be in any draft leagues with current, especially leagues that are leagues where you keep players from year to year. The perception of bias there on how I rate players would just be impossible to overcome. Didn't matter how pure my attitude and performance was, nobody believed it. So, we have that great episode, by the way, an anecdote in the Stratomatic Fanatics book about Tony Brizzolero, major league pitcher, Stratomatic fanatic, playing in a league in Houston, face-to-face, Dyson cards, and some guy in his league accusing Tony Brizzolero of actually giving up home runs to Jose Cruz and somebody else in real major leagues to help his team. It's like, are you kidding me? It's my career. I'm not giving up home runs. But that's the perception of bias. Anytime you want to talk about what bias is and the perception of bias, that's how strong it is. Okay, so anyway, I will not allow myself to play in competitive, holdover leagues with contemporary players because I'm doing the ratings, baseball, football. Now, I had played in some Stratomatic leagues in the past before I started doing this, and solo projects, a variety. Like a lot of people, I'm especially fond of my formative years. I'm old enough now that's the 1960s, and so I'm playing a lot of 1968 NFL East, playing a whole schedule of that. I played an entire 1967 league with every team, the entire schedule, and I do a lot of solo projects that aren't full replays. I would do things like take one division and play the full schedule of the division against each other. I'll take, I did some of the things that I've written about on Strat's site or in the old Strat fan, the Super Bowls that never were, the early 60s involving the AFL teams and NFL teams. I do a lot of what ifs. But, being sort of stuck in the 60s with a lot of my projects, not just football, a lot of baseball, hockey, that, really a lot of my favorite teams, the really better teams are the teams I think are best in football. Most of them are after that era. I think probably in the 50s, 60s, the only teams I put in the list of greatest teams would be the 58 Colts and the 68 Chiefs. Generally, I think the greatest teams are the ones who are very difficult to keep under 30 points, but whose defenses are good enough to keep people from scoring 30. It's kind of how I define it.
I like it. And you're forgive me for not remembering your favorite team. Again, you grew up in New York. Was it the Jets or the Giants?
No, I grew up in Detroit.
Detroit.
Actually, I adopted the Minnesota Vikings.
Okay.
In our neighborhood, we grew up. Our house was on a bordered a park, and all the houses that bordered the park, of course, had kids. And we had a lot of boys. We played sports all day long, and then we played games like Stratomatic, in the evening. And it was a pretty precocious group of kids back in our preteens and teens in terms of sports knowledge. And so while it was okay to root for the home team, the Detroit teams, if you were really cool, you knew everything there was to know about some other team. And so I adopted the Cincinnati Reds back in 1961 because Frank Robinson and Vada Pinson were really amazing. I'm seeing the highlights on This Week in Baseball. Mm-hmm. To this day, I can still sing you the Wiedemann beer commercial from that. But knowing everybody's jersey number at night, we might be playing Strat and eating chips and drinking Coke and turning the radio to the stations we could get, from Pittsburgh or Cincinnati or St. Louis or whatever with the 5,000 watt stations, and listening to both things.
Glenn, there's a Wiedemann's Brewery here in Cincinnati now where we take our kids to on Tuesday nights to play Singo. And so the beer is back around again. So that's awesome.
Yeah, you can't cure ham in just one day. So anyway, so the Cincinnati Reds and the Minnesota Vikings with scrambling Fran Tarkenton, mm-hmm. and the Chicago Blackhawks with Stan Mikita and Glenn Hall and Bobby Hull, and the Cincinnati Royals with Oscar Robertson and Jerry Lucas. Those were the teams I adopted at the time. But we had, everybody else, Eagles, Steelers, Boston Bruins, you name it. So we were always on each other's cases. Trash talking didn't become a term until when? The 80s, maybe? Yeah. We were trash talking. We were trash talking when we were 10 and 12,
Very cool.
Your guy got beat for the goal.
So a couple of things. When you play your replays, someone asked, is there a particular set of rules that you prefer to play with? I would assume since you're playing 60s, you're going to use more of the old school type of rules. I'm curious if you would use emphasize 6 linebacker or great player impact rule, stuff like that. What do you like to use when you're replaying?
Well, if I'm using the computer, I'm using the rules from that era. I click that automatically. I generally don't use this emphasize the 6 impact rule. I kind of like the dump off pass rule and some of the other things. So, before I start any replay, I go to the options and say, well, this is what I'm going to use this time. And, I experiment from time to time. I have used those other rules that I've decided not to use all the time.
When you're creating card values for players in the modern game, are you creating them with a particular set of rules in mind? Like when you do your replays to check the statistics and the wins and losses, are you trying to match the modern game more? I mean, do you use those rules when you're doing it, or you just use, what are you using for that? Like, do you just bring it up and say reset to default and use those rules that the Strat sends out?
Well, everything that I'm working on has the formulas that Hal Richmond created. All right. So my discretion comes on things like the 0, 4, 5, and 6 ratings. That's me making those decisions. Now, in some cases, it's pretty obvious. This guy's a 6. This guy's a 0. Lots of subs are 0s. All right. So, and I have a little bit of discretion for things like James Conner and Chase Edmonds. All right. I've got to make Conner better than Edmonds. How am I going to do that? But I'm still working within the limits, the constraints, if you will, of what the formulas dictate and what they will allow. So no, I'm not working on a particular rule set that anticipates, most gamers are going to use this rule option. No, it's not part of the process.
So it was my perception, and it sounds like my perception was wrong, which is not a surprise. It was my perception that a really good yak rating could ding a flat pass card. I thought Alvin Kamara got dinged a year or so ago. I thought he had a great year catch. Could an yak ding a flat pass card?
Well, probably, and the reason I'm saying probably is I don't do the yak rating. Okay. That's done in the office, and I don't do the quarterback flat pass either. All right, that's done in the office after I have already given the numbers for the short pass and long pass completions. The flat pass work is then done. I do flat pass receivers, but I do not change their card in anticipation of a yak.
Okay.
In fact, now that we talk about it, I don't think that after I have produced the yardage on the flat pass cards that those change after the yak is done.
Yeah, I was wrong. Surprise, surprise. Cool.
All right. We talked a little bit earlier about the guys who find these errors on the forum, and they post them there, and it seems like for the new seasons those things get corrected, but for the retro seasons it might slip for a version or two because the person that's carding the retro stuff gets reports of errors from a different developer. Like Mike Kane might get it, hey, that one of Fred Bobbert's seasons has these errors in them, but he doesn't want to touch them or doesn't have the ability to touch them, and it has to be until Fred Bobberts has the time to go back and look at those things and verify them. Like, is that the way it works, or is that just our perception from the outside? If we found an error on a season that was developed by one of these guys, could we get it fixed, quicker? Is what they're asking.
Well, you may probably know that Fred is a quality control guy, expert by profession. And he has written several programs that are excellent at checking card set and basically saying, whoops, there's a problem. This halfback is rated for a flanker. He's got to have long pass reception. This quarterback's 2-team receptions are off by 1 because he's got this many right combinations. Anyways, this isn't an individual fly spec thing for Fred. He's written the programs and it spits out certain things, some of which are things that need to be corrected and some of which are not. So if he should catch something with his program in the kind of sets you're talking about, that could be corrected. There is a problem, if we call it that, or at least I would say an obstacle to doing what you're talking about, in that the sets created by those guys do not use the formulas that I have.
Hmm.
Those formulas are closely held in-house. They're just not given out.
Right.
So even though you trust somebody, once you start increasing the number of people who have them, it's impossible to keep control over how many will end up with them. All right. So if Mike should do something that to the community looks like that's not quite right, it's hard to confirm that it's a problem in the first place. So that's what we're looking at here. But if we do catch something, I think there has been a time when I've caught something in one of those sets and say, wait a minute, this can't be right because, then we'll try to fix it. We will fix it if we can.
Got it.
Let's see. Someone else asked. 2 sets have never been produced, even with a 6-card set or complete set. And I don't know if this is under your purview or not, but we'll throw the question out. 77 and 81. By the way, you did an 81 Strat fan of the Cincinnati Bengals,
Right.
which was my favorite team. That Kenny Anderson card, remember, it just got banned from tournament play. So Mike Vander, anyway. So it just got banned from tournament play. But 77, 81. Any thoughts? Do we know anything on that?
Well, I don't make those decisions, but I am part of the discussions, and that they come up. Here's the next season we're going to do. Here's the next card set, whatever. I think we should expect that 77 and 81 will be done. I don't know the timetable.
Sure.
Whether now they appear as a 6-card set or whether they appear as a full set probably depends on when they're done. So, for instance, if Strat decides it wants to put out a full season, but it wants to do more than that, maybe it does 77 as a six-team set and is putting out some other season, as a full. You could argue it either way, and in the end, I'll probably hear what's going to happen before it happens, but I will not be the one deciding that.
Another one I've heard, it didn't come up on this question. a lot of demand. People are looking for the 85 USFL. So I don't know if that's ever been talked about as well.
What is a lot of demand?
Oh, okay. Maybe it's 5 guys on the forum saying, "Hey, I want to see USFL 85." I'm not
Well, see, this is the thing about niche stuff is favorite phrase is a lot of us, a lot of people, and it's like, okay, start counting.
Yeah.
And Stratomatic is going to do a card set. It's got to go to the printer. It's got to run a certain number that's a lot more than 5 or 9 or 13. Okay.
Reading between the lines.
So
I still see those USFL sets available as 6. Might be saying the demand for USFL was not that great, perhaps. I'm reading between the lines.
those were I think Roberts' projects, and they're great, fun. But I think if we were to do any kind of poll that says, do you want the 85 USFL or would you like another NFL season? 85 USFL will get buried.
Fair enough.
So I'm not saying it'll never get done. In fact, I guess it probably has a better chance of getting done in the near future only because there were so few other seasons to do.
Right.
NFL, right? But
would you ever do the modern USFL or one of those here's a new league. We got the WSFL.
Well, I'm pretty sure Hal Richmond was going to want to say, let's see what the popularity of this league really is. Right. At first when StratFan came out, I asked him for permission to do things like AFL cards and things like the 81 Bengals and retro season, because he didn't expect that they would do that. He gave us permission only because he didn't expect that they would. Well, StratFan established that there was a market for those. We were selling out those issues. And when we did our own card sets, we were selling sufficient quantity that if Stratomatic took it over, Stratomatic could certainly sell more than we were, and it would be enough to justify Stratomatic doing it. Now, as an aside about the Kenny Anderson card getting banned, those teams created for StratFan were done by Ron Brammer. And his process was to rate the cards based on statistics and team and season norms, and then to play test them. I don't know how much play testing went in it, but it was a part of his process. However, looking back, we can see that a lot of those cards were not done the way they would have been done if Stratomatic was doing it. And even some of it was even the basic things like how many completions on 2-team passers, things like that. So Brammer was a great assistance to the community by even introducing this. And the fact that he did allowed StratFan to be able to publish them, which in turn convinced Stratomatic that it should do things like that.
And here we are.
So here we are. So if it hadn't been for Ron Brammer in the first place, I don't know how long it would have been before we get all these great retro seasons.
Well, I don't know if you know, but Jay runs the Brammer and now / Ron Dickinson tournament each year.
I don't run it, but I'm part of the crew. So yeah.
He runs it. He's a man. El mero. No, Jay does a great job of putting it out there, and one of these years I'm going to have to get out there and it always lands on a draft day for for the September.
You're in 20 leagues, Dennis.
Well, if you're in 20 leagues, you got a lot of draft days, right?
What I'll do is 1 year I'll trade all my picks away, head out in the door, and then
you can be the Mike Ditka of Stratomatic. Trade all your picks for a first round pick.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. We have a question coming in from the chat. Ron McGrath asked, "How can I get a hold of the Glenn charts for football?" So you had some charts that you built or you published way back in the day for solo play.
Yeah.
You still have those laying around somewhere?
No.
Are they available online?
No, I don't have them laying around somewhere. I think if I dig hard enough, I probably could find them. But I never made them in quantity. They were published in StratFan. And I think after a while, I was getting so many requests for them, I did make some copies of those pages out of StratFan and sent them to people. But I don't know. Let me see if I do find them. I'm not gonna do an excavation, but if I do find them, I'll let you know, and then you get the word out, and we'll make them available somehow.
Yeah, we'll put a link down in the comments after we figure out where they are. And I bet you may not even have to do the work, Glenn. I think somebody on the forum probably has them somewhere.
Well, I will grant permission on that. StratFan was all copyrighted material, and so it can't just be legally reproduced. But I will give you and everybody who's interested in this now permission to make copies of those charts and distribute them at will.
Wow, very good. I don't do board game cards and dice playing, but that's pretty cool. That's very nice of you, Glenn. So,
let's see. Here's a question. It has to do with asterisk pass rush points.
Yes.
So then they write in. We saw a big move here. A number of players jumping from 13 to 21 total asterisk rated players. The points up from 39 to 80, while pass blocking staying flat. And so I guess my question would be, were there more sacks? Did they generate more sacks? Are you trying to generate more sacks? Or is that just how the season played out?
It's how the season played out. It's a formula. Now, there are some, this is another jigsaw puzzle for me when I'm doing it. And that is that there's a basic rule, and I can divulge this easy enough because everybody can figure it out. And that is for defensive linemen, if one guy's got 1 sack, another guy's got 2 sacks. The guy with 2 sacks is going to have a rating 1 higher than the guy who got 1 sack, and so on up the 8 was 3 more than 5. All right, linebackers are considered separately, and they have the same rule within the linebacker group. Where it comes interesting at times is in the modern NFL, something that never was an issue decades ago, or even maybe, decades ago, is now there are things like teams with 8 defensive linemen who have sacks. I have to distribute the amount of pass rush time to get the team number right for the overall sack rating. So now, this is complex to explain. Now, if I have to distribute that playing time among 8 guys rather than 6 guys, or 8 guys rather than 5 guys who have sacks on the defensive line, that means lower percentage time for each of them. That inflates their sack ratings. And if you think about it, while that can create a disparity from one team to the next, this guy had 4 sacks on this team, this guy had 4 sacks on the other team, how come they're so different? It makes sense that you're not going to rush all 8 pass rushers, 8 defensive linemen at once, are you? All right, so their playing time gets distributed, and their sack ratings are affected by that. Now, the reality is that most of us are not substituting like the NFL does. Right? You're going to use your best guys all game long if you can on the defensive line, right? And some of those best guys are in there because of their 4, 5, 6 ratings, and some of them are in there because of their sack ratings. At least in certain situations, you bring in the higher sack guy. That's okay. But reality probably is that certain guys who have okay sack ratings but not better than the starters are never getting in there. Right. And unless there's an injury. So they're not actually getting the percentage of time on the field that I have to give them. So there could be a distortion there. But as far as just why are there more guys with asterisks, that's just because that's the way the formula's spit it out on what ratings they're entitled to.
Yeah, I think what you allude to too, all these guys getting sacks, not all of them are getting carded. Khalil Mack racked up a handful of sacks and then got injured, didn't get carded. Yep. I would imagine that his sacks then had to be applied to the rest of the Bears. Is that accurate?
Yes. It's accurate to the extent of distributing the playing time. It is not a 1-for-1, here are 7 sacks that have to be added. Okay, but there's a team rating for the number of sacks. And it's actually not just a number that says this many sacks. It's really a thing with a decimal point. And it has to do with whether this is a 3-4 team or a 4-3 team. And again, a lot of columns on a spreadsheet that have now been computerized. But so it's just not as simple as saying, oh, well, Khalil Mack's 7 sacks or whatever it was, we gave 1 to this guy and 2 to this guy and 1 to that guy. It's not like that. In fact, when teams have a bunch of sacks for a defensive back, like Jamal Adams,
Yes, sir. Yeah.
That is an issue because we don't have strong safeties and cornerbacks pass rushing. So, and free safeties don't get a sack rating, right. And that's not built into the usual formula. So those teams that got a lot of sacks from their secondary, if you are coaching that team, you need to blitz more. You want to get those sacks. Yeah. But that's what defensive backs are when they rush, right? They're blitzers. Right. You just need to use your linebackers more to do that.
Something that kind of ties in with that, and a little bit of an aside, this interesting little dynamic is if you were to have two asterisk players on the same team, that the high level one, you say, I had this pop up in a league. I was doing a retro league. Coy Bacon, 1976. He's a 10 asterisk. A Curly Culp at nose tackle. He's a 1. Curly Culp half the time was costing Coy Bacon sacks. So it's just a funny little dynamic that sort of can happen with things sometimes. So
Yeah, that can happen.
Yeah.
But that's by design, right? Because there was been some talk like, why don't they add them together? Or why don't they always use the highest guy? But then, like you say, then the other guy would never get any sacks or wouldn't get any sacks off the asterisk column anyway. So,
yeah, I mean, it's really important for everybody to understand. I think most of the community who's on the forum and so forth does understand this kind of thing, and that is, for everything you put into the game, you take something away.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
You're going to have an effect that helps the offense. You have to have an equal counter effect, you know, for the defense, and in baseball, same thing, basketball, hockey, you know. So you don't make rule changes just because you say, wouldn't that be nice? It really needs a deeper analysis and an understanding of, well, if we do this, what are the potential unintended consequences?
Right.
And what are the actual consequences you really can foresee very easily? Oops, this creates this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's possible for us to overlook something like that, but we have, you know, 4 or 5 heads on it. So, and then at times, you know, we are consulting with people like you as well, you know, saying, hey, look, thinking about this. How do you think it plays?
yeah, we can tell you how it plays. We love to think about strategy.
Well, I think that's really valuable. You know, I think that the NFL, when they change rules a lot, but they have a competition committee, and part of it includes coaches. And I think it's really important, say, for the NFL, for instance, to say, if we do this rule, hey, coach, how would you coach because of this rule?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, well, there's a loophole here. I would always do this.
Right.
Or I would never do what you want to have happen here because of X, Y, Z. Well, bad idea then.
Yeah, we saw that with Belichick when he was manipulating the timeouts in the fourth quarter or the delay of game penalties, where he could like burn the clock, take the delay of game penalties, and the clock would start up again, and then he'd get like a free minute and a half or 2 minutes burned off the clock when he was trying, you know, he's trying to protect the lead. And then they had to change that rule. So that's a good point.
Yeah, well, if coaches are not trying to get an edge, you know, they're not doing their job. And some
Yeah.
coaches are experienced enough and smart enough and spend enough time at it to have an edge on somebody else, and it makes a difference. Happens in baseball too.
Mm-hmm.
See, you had mentioned earlier that one of the areas that you have to tweak is that deep pass wrong or deep pass right completions on quarterback cards. Anthony on the forum, who also gave us our previous questions about the Asterisks ones, he tracks all this stuff. He has this spreadsheet where he counts it from year over year. But he brought out that quarterbacks with at least 8 long pass right completions is only down to 2 in 2021 versus 6 in the 2020 set. And then the long pass right completions across the top 25 quarterbacks are down about 7%. So are we seeing a lessening of the number of bombs that teams are throwing? Is that what's driving that? Or are we trying to that's why we saw is it tied into the more asterisks on the line because we need more sacks because everybody's throwing short and flat now?
Well, the quarterback completions is not tied into the sacks. But well, let me put it this way. It can be in this sense. If we've talked about this before. We used the case of Matt Ryan a couple of years ago. If an offensive line is bad enough, is having enough problems, that a quarterback who's perfectly capable of throwing deep throws deep a lot less often because he has to get the ball out faster, then that will show up in our ratings. It doesn't show up. It shows up a little bit in the formulas, but it will also be something that I make a note of. You know, so Ben Roethlisberger 1 year, Matt Ryan another year, Brett Favre 1 year, Kerry Collins, very good example of a guy who really should get dinged a little bit on the one discretionary rating I have to put in affecting long passes. And so that can happen. But other than that, this very vulnerable offensive line, it's pure formula as to what is driving the numbers. Now, we have rules that I have to follow about the relationship between right and wrong completions. So I'm actually play with the numbers a little bit, not as a matter of discretion, but as a number to make sure the relationship ends up okay.
Got it.
As far as, so there isn't an effort here to reduce long pass right completions. It would be more likely the result of the NFL itself. And what we've seen year after year is completion percentages going up and yards per catch going down. And
Got it.
Deduced from that, there are fewer long passes being completed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I happen to look because I saw that item about, well, we have fewer quarterbacks with 8 completions right.
Yeah, it's an arbitrary break, but
Well, I think maybe arbitrary. I haven't done the analysis. Those guys have, but I did take a look, and there's like 8 guys who have 7. So are we cutting it really fine here? Or is there a line being drawn where, if we drew it in a different place, comparing a couple seasons?
And you had mentioned that on the stock cards, it looked like there's more long pass completions on the cards themselves, on the defensive cards. So
well, that's a serious issue for anybody trying to play defense. I mean, having a team that can defend well against the pass is pretty precious. You got one of those, you don't trade it. And that ties into sacks as a matter of strategy. If you have a team today that does not rush the passer well, good luck, because you're not getting sacks. You are giving up yards.
Mm-hmm. And if you add the dump off, that only adds more. I think it's dump off is fits the modern game very well.
So this also is really just like we read, or what I read about with NFL teams all the time, because the defensive line is not getting enough push, enough sacks, enough pressures. This team is blitzing more. Mm-hmm. And a Stratomatic coach handling a real team, or maybe even a draft team, is going to have to do the same thing. Say, okay, I'm not getting it from my defensive line. I better be blitzing. If I got to blitz more maybe than I'm comfortable with, I'm going to be vulnerable somewhere else. But of course, that's the nature of the game. You put pressure in one spot, you have a problem somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Very good.
Great.
Well, that covers just about all the questions. I mean, if we can nitpick, somebody asked, why did George Kittle get a 5 instead of a 6? I'm sure that you have some metrics or something that's telling you his run blocking fell off.
He came up a 5 on everything we looked at. I was surprised at that too. All right, he is a 5. So, I mean, I think there's a good question about Trayvon Diggs.
Oh yeah.
Is he really a 6? Well, he got a 6 because he's first team All-Pro, and he got first team All-Pro because he led the league in interceptions, was very dynamic at it. I remember a great quote from Troy Aikman after Diggs had interceptions in 3 or 4 or 5 straight games. And Aikman during the game said, "You cannot convince this guy that any ball thrown into area, he's not the intended receiver." But Trayvon Diggs gave up more yards in his coverage than any defensive back in the league.
Mm-hmm.
That, if he hadn't have been first team All-Pro, the argument would have been for him to be a 4.
Yeah. Wow. So you have to bury that on the Dallas defensive cards then, right?
Well, yeah, that's what happens. So, if everybody on Dallas gets a 6, you can expect the yards to show up, somewhere else. X's become zeros, then the yards elsewhere go up.
Another question that I think we've talked about before, but just wanted to put this bug in your ear again. Teams that run a 3-4, we're seeing teams switch to a 3-4. Their nose tackle, the starter is rated as a nose tackle. Their backup is usually, or typically rated as a defensive tackle. Is there any movement on that to maybe get them rated, say 3-4, and they when they come into the game they're playing nose tackle, rated as a nose tackle?
Here's the issue. The computer game requires 3 guys to be a defensive tackle.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
You get teams that have no more 3-4 teams that have no more than 3 guys who play defensive tackle. Some of them only have 2. I got to take some guy who used to be a defensive tackle who's got the weight to play defensive tackle, but is now a defensive end, and say he's a secondary position defensive tackle and put him a 0 there. But so we need 3 guys who can play defensive tackle for, believe it or not, the 5-2 defense.
Mm-hmm.
All right, who's playing 5-2 defense now? Well, all teams play any formations now, right? Every defensive end drops into coverage sometimes. We're just not doing all that.
But you could put 3 nose tackles there and be legal, right?
Yeah.
So okay.
So now I think there are occasions we give the backup a nose tackle because there's sufficient ability to do that. And it was so clear that this backup actually was a starter half the time or close to it, and that's what it is. So when I can do that, I try to do that. But a lot of times I'm just going to DT.
Perfect. Okay.
Something you did this year, I have to commend you for. It seemed a little newer, a little more creative. I saw 3 or 4 4-3 defensive tackles, run stuffer kind of guys, given a nose tackle rating. Grover Stewart, I believe, was one, and a couple other guys that would typically just been a 5 run stuffing defensive tackle for a 4-3. Get that bonus little nose tackle rating, and I think that was slick. I like that a lot.
Well, those are teams that really were a hybrid. All right, so every team runs a 3-4 and a 4-3. Every team runs a 2-5 or a 2 something.
Right.
Teams are now running 1-man defensive lines.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We just can't card the game for all of that. It's just,
right.
It's the ratings would go bonkers, and the number of formations you could put on the field go bonkers and slow down the game ridiculously.
Mm-hmm.
Who wants to have 5 minutes to get a play done?
Right.
Because you move everybody around before every play. Well, so limited moving parts. Stratomatic, I think, has a good number of moving parts, but if you wanted to emulate everything the NFL's doing, everybody be able to move on every play, and that's just not workable.
Yeah.
But there are some teams. New England has tended to be one of those teams that truly are hybrid. They started off the season as a 4-3, 3-4, then switched, or they ran both so often. I mean, I had a really difficult time. I think it was New England. They usually give me problems, but I had a really difficult time with one team setting them up so that the ratings of the backups and the starters worked for both the 3-4 and the 4-3. Things like that cost me hours.
We appreciate the time and effort because it's a great product. We really do.
Well, it's the part that bothers me the most, I suppose, is that I really want it to work the way this team played.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I don't want to just contrive it and say, well, this is easy enough. I'll just add defensive end here and outside linebacker here, and all the positions are covered. Well, what happens when I do that? Oh, okay, this, but that isn't really the way they played. So now there's got to be a solution, and there usually is. It just takes a lot longer to figure it out sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I really appreciate all the work you do for it. I think you're kind of like an umpire in a way, because I haven't really heard any complaints on the forum or big things like, oh, this guy's way off, or this. You don't have that. And we did back in the day, once or twice that would come up, but I don't really hear that much anymore. I think that the sets are carded well. They play well for draft and for stock leagues. I know you're not designing it for draft leagues, but we enjoy the heck out of it and appreciate everything you put into it. Is there anything else you wanted to ask Jay or Glenn? Did you have anything you wanted to bring up? Because I think you've exhausted our questions and you answered.
I think Cincinnati was one of the teams that gave me the headaches this year because they were hybrid.
Yeah.
And, so you got Hendrickson as an outside linebacker, but also as a defensive end, and the other guy on the other side, same thing, and that was a headache to do.
Yeah. They're going to be even more so heading into this year. So who knows, right? So we'll
By the way, I met Trey Hendrickson here in the off season before this past season. Really nice guy.
Yeah.
Not full of himself at all. It had this big season in New Orleans, signed a nice free agent contract. Mm-hmm. He was humble as can be.
Neat.
I just said to him, when we introduced, just met him out of context, had nothing to do with football. And you said his name. I said, a good season last year. Then he spit out his stats, and then explained why he was leaving New Orleans because he wasn't going to get the playing time he deserved. So
that's awesome. So that 81 Bengals Strat fan team you did, my brother worked with the kick returner, David Verser. He was a Cincinnati policeman with my brother. I gave him the card and asked him to autograph it. Okay. So David Verser gets the card, goes to sign it, and he looks down and says, "Fumble? I didn't fumble." Oh, it's on all the cards. It's not your fault, Dan. It's not your fault.
It's just a fumble. Well, I think it's in the Stratmac Fanatics book about Hal being confronted by some current or former Detroit Lion who had looked at the ratings and saw the zeros and said, "No NFL player is a zero." Hal's trying to explain it's the dice. That's the way, we read the ratings. You can't make them a one. But Hal was pretty intimidated at the time. There's quite a size difference between that player and Hal.
And the Lions would have had a lot of zeros.
Yeah.
Yeah, jocks versus geeks. With us geeks usually lose, so you want to stay away from the physical altercations. So, all right. Well, Glenn, thank you again for your time. This has been great. I think everybody's going to really enjoy this, and appreciate your generosity. Also on the charts, those people who play cards and dice, they're going to really be excited to hear that news, and we'll look forward to seeing what's coming up in the future. Like you said, we've run out of past seasons to card. We'll see what direction Strat decides to go, and I'm one of many coaches that really enjoys this hobby and appreciate and thank you for everything you do for it.
Hey, thank you. It's always great to be with you, and I really appreciate everybody caring about the game so much that they want to know so much. It's great.
All right, guys.
All right,
shut it down. We'll see you guys till the next time. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.